So I was asked to give this discussion and conversation because, as you probably know, treatments are very important to getting your work in front of decision makers and being able to put together a treatment when you're not in the room to give the pitch. You want to make sure that your presentation is as tight and as smart and as articulate as it can be, and really displays whatever passion you have about the project within the boundaries of the treatment. What I'm going to give you today are the basic building blocks of a treatment. You may find that different organizations require different things for submissions for have your series to be considered. For example, if you submit your project to the Sundance Episodic Lab, for example, you need to not only have a treatment of the series, but you need to have the first pilot episode written. You need to have a synopsis of the 10 or 12 or however many episodes there are going to be in the first season. And they ask you for a lot of supporting documents, and many of which we will talk about during this presentation. So know that this is a rather exhaustive list, but what you use for your particular application to a particular organization may differ by organization and by application. For those of you who don't know, I'm Ron Simons. I'm from Simon Says Entertainment. We are a company that creates content for the stage, Broadway, independent film. I'm developing a few web series as well. And so the idea behind the company is to create commercially viable product that has a aesthetic that is highly creative. So artistic integrity is as important to us as commercial viability. And we want to do work that not only adds something to the discourse of either conversation of what's important in the world today, what's in the zeitgeist, but basically supports the voices of underrepresented communities, be they African Americans, Latinos, women, the disabled, LGBTQ, any number of underrepresented communities that often Hollywood does not serve, and stories that are not told. So that's our mission. That's my background. That's what I'm doing, Simon Says, as well as being an actor. So welcome aboard. Let's go. The first thing I want to encourage you to do is know who your reader is before you submit your treatment. I've outlined 3 characteristics that I think you can pretty well assume will be characteristics of your presenter, that they are highly educated, they're incredibly busy people, and they're very professional. So I encourage you to go beyond those things, but understand as much as possible. If there's going to be one person or a group of people that you can research, understand who they are and what kind of product they have produced in the past, so that you know whether or not your product would be at the top of the list of the things that they would consider in their wheelhouse, or if it's something that they might be less interested in. Don't necessarily change your work, but you want to highlight those aspects of the work that seem to fit with whoever is that might be reading your application. So this is just a way that you do with any presentation, and that is to know who it is that you're going to be in the room, and in this case, who will be reading your treatment. So because we're going to assume that your reader is highly educated, there are some do's and don'ts. You have to make sure that your presentation has a very clear organization. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, that it doesn't ramble on, that the formatting is consistent throughout, so that if you're going to have a hierarchy of bullet points, that you maintain that hierarchy of bullet points throughout whatever subsection or section that you're using to describe whatever part of your treatment you're describing, should you decide to use formatting in that era. Your formatting may be very simple. It just may be a few paragraphs, in which case formatting isn't as important, but whatever formatting you use, make sure that it's consistent. And for God's sake, make sure that you run it through a spelling checker, so that we who read many treatments and scripts, we immediately get turned off by a submission where there are a number of spelling mistakes, because that says they're not a careful writer. And if you're not a careful writer, that doesn't bode well for working with you in the future, because if you can't provide a treatment that has very few or hopefully no spelling errors, then we should expect that your attention to detail is not going to be consistent throughout the relationships you want to form. Make sure that you don't have run-on sentences. I can talk ad nauseum, and some of us are very good at the gift of gab, but you don't want to write the way that you speak. So make sure that your sentences are clear and succinct, and don't run on ad nauseum. And of course, you want to make sure that the grammar is good. I really encourage everyone, before you submit a project, that you have a second person read the document that you're going to submit, because sometimes the spell checker doesn't catch minor little details. You might spell T-H-E-I-R correctly there, but what you might have wanted to say was T-H-E-R-E, and the spell checker may not catch that as an error in the context of what you're writing. So I always encourage people to have another pair of eyes or two look at it for specifically those kinds of errors: grammar, run-on sentences, spelling, etc., etc. I'm also a big fan of visual, and men, as you probably know, and there are a lot of men who are making decisions in this industry, are very visual individuals. So the more you can express visually, the better off you probably are. In the world of independent filmmaking, for example, there is a construct called a lookbook, and the lookbook not only gives you a lot of information about what the project is, it will often include images to give you a sense of the world, whether it's dark and brooding, or bright and fluffy, or light and airy. Using images that give you a sense of what the project is, how it might look or how it might feel, is not a bad thing. And having some verbiage around that to give people an idea of what it is that you're planning is not a bad idea either. I don't go into much of that for the rest of the presentation, but I did want to include it because that is often not seen in treatments, and so that might actually set your presentation apart from other presenters who are hoping to get those same dollars that you're going after. Another characteristic of people that you should assume will be reading your treatment is that they're very busy. They don't have a whole lot of time. Therefore, your presentation should be very concise and to the point. And I don't want you to cheat the presentation or cheat your project by giving too little information, but make sure that the information that you do share is very concise and clear. And if you have another person to read, make sure that that's one of the information points that you give them, that you want this to be a clear and concise piece. The language doesn't need to be flowery. You don't have to worry about big vocabulary to impress people. I really could care less about that, but I do want you to use words that help me understand what not only is happening from a data point of view, but what's happening from a presentation point of view. And so when I say here, for example, in the second bullet point, you must not be highly repetitious or flowery in tone, what I'm saying is that don't take out and make this just so vanilla that it lacks character. Just make sure that if you've said something, if it's really important, you can say it twice. If it's critically important, you can say it 3 times. But be very aware that you're repeating yourself in your treatment, and you're repeating it for a very specific reason and in a certain context. Flowery tone, for me, it just gets in the way of my understanding what it is that you're trying to say. Now, that being said, I want you to understand that it is important to balance both the artistic and the business. And so having some sense of the feel and the sound, a journey for me as someone who's understanding what the project is that you're pitching, feel free to use some of your artistic license to express the way that I, the presenter, or rather the reader, might feel were I to experience this content. So if you were using words such as, you know, the town is dark and brooding, you know, where shadows exist, in which unknown, unseen threats may live at every turn, that tells me a lot about the environment in which I would find myself were I to be experiencing your project. So you can still use those kinds of clear imagery but just don't go on ad nauseum about that unless it's particularly to give us a sense of the world in which your project inhabits. The third thing that you want to be aware of about your reader is that they're professionals. So that is to say, they are looking for a specific set of things, because you're not the only treatment that they're going to be reading probably in that review cycle, so you have a lot of competition. So because you're knowing that your presenter, or rather your reader, is a professional, you must understand that the reader, really knows their business well. And so you must know their business well, so that you don't speak down to them because they don't understand, but by the same token, you have to make sure that you articulate all the things that they would come to expect from a successful or a very well conceived treatment. And all that means is you got to live in the details. I'm listing here as the what, the when, the where, the how, the who, and the why. Those are all the questions that you will ask any question that begins with one of those, and you have a line item in your treatment that speaks to one of each of those, then you'll be okay. You will have covered all the bases needed to make sure that you have given the reader as much information as helpful so that they can assess your project to their best ability. And as is noted at the very bottom of this slide, don't assume that the readers are just going to love the project because you love the project. There must be a reason why they're going to love the project. And I will tell you this now, and I'll repeat it. One of the things that's really important that should come out, whether you are writing about this treatment or whether you're pitching this project to someone in person, is that your passion for the project must arrive. We must understand how and why you're so passionate about this project, because if we don't, and we just get an encyclopedia of dates of when it's going to happen and how it's going to roll out, then you're missing a really amazing opportunity to bring us into the fold and make us feel the same passion that drives you to want to make this product come about. So don't miss that opportunity when you do your treatment or when you do a pitch to anyone about your project. Help folks understand why it is that you're passionate about it. And that might be you're passionate about it because, you know, you grew up in a brothel and, you know, dealing with, you know, women who have very little into their name, but who work very hard for everything they get. And our sex workers is something that you know very well because that's an environment that you grew up in, or you grew up in a very violent family, or you had a grandfather who was an alcoholic, or you had an uncle who was physically abusive. And so it will give us a sense about why you care, because if we don't know why you care or understand or feel that you care, then it's unlikely and it's unreasonable for you to expect that we should care. So that passion is really, really very important. So let's dig down. The building blocks of a treatment are this. This is organized by the questions that I mentioned on the slide before this. The first is the what. You want to, of course, make sure that in any treatment and in any presentation or pitch, you express the title of the project. You want to let folks know what the genre of it is. Is it a horror? Is it a coming-of-age screenplay or series? Is it a drama? Is it science fiction? You want to have a log line for a film. A log line is 1 or 2 sentences that succinctly describes your project. Excuse me. It's very important that you know and have this for every project that you do, because most every application that you submit to will want to know what is the log line. For example, one of our films is called Gun Hill Road, and one might say that the log line for Gun Hill Road is a Puerto Rican dad comes home to a philandering wife and a teenage son who's transgender. Period. End of story. That's the log line for the film. And what that log line does, it gives you a sense of who the characters are, whose story we are telling, who likely the protagonists are, and because of the description and the words that were chosen, you would guess that it probably has a lot of drama involved, because in the Latino community, where machismo is so difficult, I didn't need to say all that, That's just presumed, just like in African American culture. It's just presumed that we have issues with sexuality, and particularly with homophobia. So that log line is a very clear, succinct way of describing that film. A synopsis is essentially just a log line in longer form. So a synopsis will be a 50-minute, a 50-word synopsis that describes over a number of minutes what your series looks like, feels like, tells where the environment is, you know, who are the main protagonists there in the story, what are their challenges, and what are their goals, what are they trying to achieve. And those three things almost always have to appear in the synopsis, so that when I read it, I understand not only the world in which the series exists, but what is it that the inhabitants of that world are trying to do, and what things are trying to thwart their effort to do it. You want to have an idea of what the length of the project is. That is to say, is this going to be a half-hour series? Is it going to be a full-hour series? Which means, is it going to be a 16-minute or a 45-minute? If it's going to be on, say, television, you have to leave room, of course, for commercial. If it's going to be web, then you have to take into account brevity, because web series in general tend to be much shorter series than you would find on television. But you want to know how many episodes in length make up a series, but also how many minutes per episode. You want to have a budget for your film or your series. So you want to have me understand, is this something that is going to require millions of dollars, because your series is about going to all of the top-rated resorts around the world. Well, that's a lot of travel. That's a lot of money, and that smells like a big budget. That may or may not be something that your reader or your station or the Netflix, whomever you're pitching this to, is really interested in. But maybe that's exactly what they're interested in, because maybe you're submitting this to Condé Nast, and they deal in high-end resorts from around the world. So that might be exactly what they're interested in. Beyond the budget, you want to know who your audience is. A lot of people, particularly creators of content, feel like, well, that's not really up to me. You know, this thing will find its audience. And I really want to encourage you to start not thinking that way. I want you to start thinking about who your audience is as you're crafting the actual product itself. You should know that this is likely going to resonate, your series is likely going to resonate with women between the ages of 18 and 45. Or it's going to be young men between the ages of 25 and 40. Whatever that demographic is, you should give enough thought based on what the content of your series is, and be able to articulate to anyone who asks, this is the audience that I feel will most well respond to this content. So knowing your audience and being able to articulate that is really helpful. And being as specific as possible. You know, saying that this film or this series is going to really appeal to everyone between the ages of 18 and 64 is to say that that just says it's for everyone. And that's not very helpful. And it's very probable not very true, because certain segments of the population will respond to it in ways that are different than other parts. And it's your job, as you're creating it, from your point of view, to find out what you think the audience for this film or series is. The other building blocks of a treatment, you have to have, of course, the script for the pilot episode for your series. That should be written out, and some places like Sundance require the script. If you're doing something that's an unscripted project or pilot, then you just need to write out what it is that you hope to accomplish and who you want to profile in that initial pilot. And documentaries, for example, are a different beast in that regard, because with a script, we know exactly what the story is before we start shooting. But in a documentary, if that's what you're pitching, documentaries unfold and the story is found as the footage is taken in and as more and more work and reporting happens. You actually can find the story as you go through the process. So it's a little trickier with documentaries, but you still have to have a direction in which you want your documentary to go and should be able to articulate that. And then finally, for your series, beyond the first episode or the pilot, you need to have a summary of the entire first season. That can be in episode 1, these 3 things happen. In episode 2, these 3 things happen. 4, 5, 6, all the way through 10 or 12, however many episodes there are in your season. I've seen some treatments where they give a paragraph for 3 seasons at a time, or rather 3 episodes at a time. So it'll be the pilot, and then episodes 2 through 5 will deal with this subject matter, and then 6 through 9 will deal with this, and 9 through 12 will deal with that. However you want to break it apart, it's up to you. But it's really important that you know that you have to know where your entire first season of this is going to go, so that we have an idea of what the beginning and the first season looks like, so that we can go, oh, that actually sounds kind of interesting, how the various stories dovetail, how they overlap, how they conflict. All that makes for good watching, of whether it's on television or the web, whatever. And it's very important that we see that and know what that is. Now let's talk about the when. For the wins in your treatment, you want to know things like, when is it that you plan to shoot this thing? Is it going to be in the fall of 2016? Is it going to be in the spring of 2016? It gives us a sense of when you need your money by, which is important for us to know. Also, the delivery dates of the project that you're creating. Is this something that you want to have in the can and edit it for the 2017 season? Or is this something that you are able to pump out and have ready in the next 6 months? And also important in the when is, when in the time period is the project set? Is this a period piece? Is this about, like Night Catches Us, one of my other films was a film about 2 former Black Panthers who were reunited in 1970s Philadelphia. Well, period pieces inherently, when you speak to a presenter or a reader, go, oh, that's money, because that means you have to have extra costs associated with vintage cars and older costumes and props and set. It inflates everything because it's a period piece. And certain periods are more difficult to find pieces for than others. So that can have a real big impact on your budget. And if you set this thing in, I don't know, the 1920s, and we look at a budget that doesn't seem to reflect that, then we're going to feel like, oh, you probably haven't done your homework. And you want to make sure that you've come across someone who has crossed every T and dotted every I and know this project better than anyone else. The where of what you might want to include in the building blocks of your treatment. Where will this thing be shot? Where is the story set? Is this set in Philadelphia in 1970s, or maybe this is set in Dubai, in the 1930s? So all the wheres of where it will be shot and where the story is set is important, because once again, it also impacts things like the budget. Because if you're going to shoot this in Louisiana, the reason you chose Louisiana may be because you know for a fact that they have really great tax breaks. And those kinds of things, like what the tax incentives are for shooting your series, is something that you should know, and know that it exists state by state. Some are more rewarding than others. So knowing what you would save in taxes if you were to shoot it in Louisiana versus what you would save if you shot it in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania is important, because that will directly impact your budget. So know all the wheres and be able to articulate that as well. How? How will you, number one, build an audience for this project? Do you already have an installed audience for this project? You have an idea for this great new series, and you think it's going to really resonate with young African Americans between 16 and 30, which could be a very lucrative demographic, then we would need to know, what have you done to build that audience already in place? How many Twitter followers do you have? How many Facebook friends do you have? Those kinds of questions will be asked of you at some point, and are being asked more frequently now. Social media in particular is becoming more and more of a gauge for individuals and companies who are looking to bring on people, whether they stars or directors or what have you, because We want to know what kind of audience you have that you bring along with you. And if you don't have an audience, how do you plan to build the audience for this project? Are you going to use social media and set up a web page and a Facebook page and hope to have 10,000 followers by the time the first pilot is done, or by the time the first series is completed and in the can and shown? What is your plan for your audience? Also very important to know, particularly for broadcast, is that broadcasters are really interested in what value you're adding that their consumers can go to after your episode is over. You will often see, for example, for more information, log on to ... and there you'll find additional content. You'll see interviews with the director. You'll see interviews with cast members. You'll see whatever other additional add value that producer has created. You need to start thinking about what that additional programming will be so that you can answer that question for networks when they say to you, so it's not going to end when your series ends or your episode ends. Now we go on to the second level of engagement, which will be offline from television, but maybe online for the web. And we talked about audience. Also important for your treatment is to know, who are you guys? What's the team that you've assembled? Who are these creative people? Who's the director? Who's the writer? The editor? Who are the producers? As well as people who are around and supporting your project. Do you have sponsorship? Do you have partners? Do you have organizations like the Ford Foundation who is giving you a grant? Do you have an organization like, I don't know, an alcoholic beverage company who is going to front some money, even for something like doing your opening night party? You're thinking about all the aspects of your project, from the earliest stages, which is just the thing in front of you, the treatment, all the way through to the end of the first season. And we want to know what is the team that's going to actually bring this to the fore and be very successful. This also fits into something that I'll talk about at the very end of this presentation, which is the pedigree of the project and the pedigree of the series. And you should always be working, whether it's a series, a television show, a book, a movie, increasing the pedigree of your project. So now we now know who your key personnel are. We understand now who's sponsoring you, what other people have put their seal of approval on your project before you even submitted it to us. Now it's important to know, why is this programming important? Now, I may read a treatment and go, oh, wow, this really can dovetail very strongly and very well with what's in the zeitgeist right now, which is Black Lives Matter. But if you don't point that out, someone might miss that connection. So articulating why this programming is important or relevant and or why it's going to be entertaining is going to be very helpful to you, because then I will be able to appreciate the fact that you thought about it, one, but also two, that I can see that what you've been presenting in terms of what the look and the feel and the content of the series is consistent with what it is that you're trying to do with building your audience, with making the content attractive, to making it compelling, to making it a brand that people want to follow. So knowing what that is and being able to articulate that in a succinct way is a good thing. And again, you have to vary by project and vary by application process how much of that you want to include, but you should have thought about that, absolutely, and include it if you can. And why is it your team? This is the team that should be doing this. Why shouldn't someone else be better poised to deliver this content? Is there something about how you came upon this construct, or your particular background, your educational background, where you grew up, your relationships with the people who are depicted in the series, or because you are really good friends with Spielberg, and Steven Spielberg and directing is a really important part of the series that you're developing, so you have an inside scoop. So understanding why it is that your team is especially qualified to deliver this content is also so important. to know.
Hey,
And
Ron,
why
I
are you
just
doing
wanted
this?
to.
What is the thing that makes you passionate about this? Why? Yes.
Sorry, I was gonna give you a time
You
check,
just want
like
to say
you said.
something?
I just want to give you a time check, like you said. So you were about 30 minutes now. I think you could probably keep going. So another maybe
Okay.
15 minutes or so, or even a little longer, and
I've
then you
got.
could open up.
Okay, I'll get to the next 10 minutes, no problem, and then we'll move on. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
So why are you compelled to do it? What about your history, your culture, or your education is making you passionate about this so that I can understand your passion and feel passionate with you? And then the last thing is pedigree. And the pedigree of the film is, or the series, I think is very important and people overlook that. And what I mean by pedigree can be anything. It could be the director that you have directing this project is an Academy Award winning director, and she has a strong reputation for delivering high quality product. It could be because the lab, you submitted this through as a television series writing lab, and it won an award. That could be part of the pedigree. The pedigree could be the actors that will be appearing in your series. That can be part of the pedigree of the film. So knowing what is going to increase the profile of your film and is very important because it's a very competitive world out there, and knowing that you have assembled a great team is awesome, but what is your competitive advantage that you have in your pocket because you have awards and stamps of approval for people outside of just your core group of those folks who are passionate about your project. That is the core of what I wanted to share with you about treatments and things that you need to think about and make sure you have answers to. And with that, I'm open to field questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ron. I think people are starting to type in their questions in the screen. Bimbola wants to know when a project is done as a series of stories, but the stories are not scripted, does that automatically put it in the category of a documentary?
No, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily a documentary. No, it just could mean that the action just doesn't have a script associated with it. It could be some story that's going to unfold in front of us. So no, it doesn't mean that those are the only two. And I apologize if I imply that those are the only two genres, which were documentary and scripted. Unscripted can mean anything that, by definition, you don't have the scripts articulating what the characters are doing and saying. So no, it doesn't have to be the same thing.
And just to, I guess, feed the mill, you mentioned Sundance, and I'm going to mention NBPC 360, which is NBPC's own series funding session. Do you have any sense of any other up and coming series specific funds that are available out there?
Um, there are. It depends. They're all over, and unfortunately, there's no one guide for
Right.
here's the book to go to get money for your series. They are usually organized around either classification, either locations. For example, if you live in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Film Foundation funds efforts that are film for filmmakers who are local. If you look at, NBPC, that's you don't have to be from any location. It just has to uh, provide content that the consumers who come to look for content to that organization are looking for. Same thing with Sundance. Sundance, there's nothing around a certain um, group of people or be they LGBT, African American, Latino, what have you. It's really about the story itself and the mission of the organization. So I wish I had a list I could tell you, and if any of you find one, please send it to me, of the list of funders who provide money to series on the regular. I will pay you well for that.
And now this is a really easy question, Ron. How do we become the next Shonda Rhimes?
Oh, that's very easy. What you need to do is, well, here's my thing. I love me some Shonda Rhimes. Never met the woman before in my life, so let me say that. But Shonda does three things really well. She creates really, really, really good content, and she has her finger on the pulse of the kind of stories that audiences respond to. And so I really encourage you to, look at the kind of work that she does in terms of how she responds. She also understands the construct of how you create uh, the structure of the content. Because if you watch things like Scandal, for example, you see that the model is there is one underlying story that continues throughout every single episode, which is this love affair and relationship between Olivia Pope and the president. And then with every new episode, it comes in with new individuals, with new challenges and new dramatic arcs that can be explored within that. And I think understanding what your model is for your storytelling and holding on to that and making sure that you're clear about it, I think will help. And even if your audience members don't think of it as that way, that model has, I think, shown to have a very clear structure will bring people back on the regular because you'll know that there's this ongoing thing that you can invest in, and then every new week there's a new story to invest in as well.
Okay. Malkia has a question. She says, in a pilot budget, how do we break out expenses that are for development, quote unquote, versus costs that support the entire season and not just the pilot? My concern is that pilots can look really expensive compared to expected costs for regular episodes because on start, development costs are heavy.
Well, I think you said what it is that you need to do, and that is, you break out the development costs. You want to have the running costs of the show, which is what is it that you need to spend on a weekly basis to make this series come to pass, and then you have the infrastructure building costs that are at the beginning that you invest in to even get the thing off the ground. I always encourage people to when it comes to budgeting, if that's not your forte, to find a line producer who does that very thing so that he or she knows about what terms like what above the line means, what below the line means, and how you budget for series and what is included in what part of the budget. So if you don't know that, there are a ton of line producers around the country, and I'm sure NBPC can give references to those. I know a few as well, more than a few, that can help you get a budget because if that's not your forte, you can learn it, but there are people who do it for a living and get that budget done and work for you.
Damon says he likes creating sizzle reels for his ideas using still images instead of video. So assuming it's a dynamic and well done work sample, do you see that as helpful or useful to building or making an idea for fun that makes sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think anything that gives me, as I said, men in particular are very visual, but I think anyone in general who wants to have a sense of what the look and the feel of this project is like should absolutely consider including images that you string together, or in, like I said, in lookbooks, though the genre is motion pictures, film, which is images in motion, a lookbook is very static, of course. So the images are photographs or they're drawings, or but they give you a sense of the tone, the feel, the emotion that is driving the story. So yeah, I would encourage you to consider adding those.
Great. Another question is from Kay Shaw. She wants to know, do you absolutely need a
K
showrunner?
Shaw, did you say that was K Shaw?
Kay Shaw, yes.
K Shaw.
Our little producer, I think I heard the name before.
Yeah, it sounds kind of familiar. I don't know. We'll come back to it in a minute. But anyway, what's your question?
Do you absolutely need a showrunner to produce a series?
Well, you need someone to operate as a showrunner for sure. Whether or not you want to call them a showrunner, you want to call them a producer, what you call them is up to you. But someone needs to undertake those tasks. I don't think you need to have one at the genesis of the project, but someone should know that those tasks need to be picked up and run with. By the time you get to the place where the project is going to be up and running on its feet, because if you don't provide that, or you can pretty be sure that whoever is going to buy the content is going to assign someone to do that, and that may or may not be something that you want. You may in fact want to be the showrunner for that project, because if you do, well, you maintain a lot of control.
Mm.
And now, if you talk about the kind of the examples would be, if you, as a showrunner, someone has to oversee the writers of the show. What are the themes that are going to be explored? What are the topics that are going to be explored? Because you can put a bunch of writers in a room and say go, but they need both either a lead writer or a showrunner to understand what does the structure of the series look like. Are we consistent with what our vision was for the first season or the first 3 episodes? And it might be finding as well, people who want to direct. Often you'll find that in many television shows, it's not the same director who has to direct every episode. Even Lee Daniels, who in his premiere season in the popular Empire series, didn't direct every single show. So you got to find people who are going to come in and direct every week. Especially the longer the show runs, the more directors are likely to come on board to direct the project.
Yeah. What else does a showrunner do? Kay wants to know.
That's
Assembling the room and okay.
Yeah, that's what I was responding to was, what the showrunner can do. The showrunner is in many ways the visionary for the project. They will push for who would want for directing it. They will make sure that they're still on point for the storytelling, overseeing the writers, what the content looks like. Is it in fact, when do we know that we've got the shootable script that we need to go into the studio? And when do we know that it's lacking of something? The showrunner has to have that approval mechanism and be the visionary to say, this isn't it yet. We got to go back to the table and figure it out. So it's sort of like the CEO of the organization that says, here's the vision, here are the marching orders. Are we on point and on schedule to deliver what we hope to deliver?
Right, right. Now, of course, there's a difference between documentary and fiction in terms of series and running that organization. I guess how would you have people organize themselves in terms of documentary series organization and preparation and proposals versus fictional work?
That's a very good question. I have to plead ignorant because I've never actually run a documentary television series. So I'm not entirely sure what one must needs do, but it occurs to me that if I'm going to be doing, let's say it's unscripted, even in unscripted content, you have to have boundaries, right? So when you have, someone has to say, this is the area in which we're going to operate. If you see a Big Brother, for example, it's just not, you put people in a room and you turn the lights on and then just say go. Someone actually, figures out that in this episode we're going to bring in a new character that no one was expecting a new house member to come into. And now this new house member has a certain set of dynamics and interests and skill sets and agendas that he or she has that maybe other people are not aware of. And you as a producer, though you're doing unscripted work, you have to understand how this might play out and how that might cause the very genesis of what makes good drama, which is conflict. You want to know where the conflict is seated. Where does the conflict come from? How do we know when the conflict has been resolved? And be able to build that in and sort of encourage that, though that's not scripted. You want to encourage an interaction so that there will be fireworks or what have you, that it's going to be an interesting television to watch.
Right. After Larry David for a little bit, the whole unscripted thing really kicked off, and you know, I didn't see a lot of younger producers taking it on because it was such a difficult thing to master. But I think my question is, in the larger sense, do you have any sense of like new like unconventional ways that people are trying to tell stories, and is it working, is it useful to study that? Because the whole thing about art is that you gotta kind of practice. So I guess my question is, what advice would you give to young producers who are trying to practice how to create series, not necessarily always submitting the proposal that they wrote yesterday because they like it. But how do they practice creating series? Does that make sense?
Well, well, you're saying, I think I heard two questions. One is particularly about unscripted, and then how do you practice creating series, which is may or may not be scripted or unscripted.
Right.
So, sounds like there are two different questions that you're asking. From I, because I'm a creative producer, so I love great storytelling and new and different ways of telling stories. One of my favorite movies I was talking about the other night was called Memento. And what makes it a really compelling story is how the story was told. It was told in a rather fragmented way that kind of kept you leaning into the story because you weren't quite sure what was going on and what was causing what was happening to be happening. So you had to really lean in and pay attention. And then once you leaned in and paid attention, then it became, okay, now I have a better understanding. Now how will this issue or this play out in the storytelling? So the good news is that I think young filmmakers have so much cheap material to start with. You can literally grab your iPhone and create a series. People have actually made movies that have gotten distribution on an iPhone. So if you can create a film on your iPhone, then don't feel as though you have to follow the scripted construct that Ron Simon said you have to do to create content. Go out there and challenge the structure. Go out there and find a different way to tell your story. And if it's unscripted, have two or three or five people, and I'm not saying this is the way to go necessarily, this is here by example, run those cameras, while a story is unfolding. Maybe you just have a bright idea and you have two people who are good actors and they've decided that you're going to play two different characters. One is a lonely man who, loves and is addicted to chocolate, and this younger woman who happens to work in Hershey, Pennsylvania for a chocolate company, but has a desire to, be a movie star someday, and throw them together and see, improv what might come out. Mike Nichols was a genius at creating the character for people, the skeleton for individual characters, and then getting them in the room and letting them play and letting their actor intuition lead them, and it came out with some amazing magical performances. And so I really would love to see more filmmakers explore unscripted work where you have the genesis of an idea and you put really smart, very creative people in a bowl or in a room or in a car and you tape it and see what happens.
Hmm. Yeah.
Go and learn from that. What worked? What didn't work? Next time we do this, maybe what we should do is we should have a camera on the outside, so that we can, capture more of the side glances of the person sitting in the back of the car who's, having some whole other life that they're not aware of while we're looking at the animated people in the front seat. Whatever the case might be. The good news is you can do just about anything you want to do. Take advantage of that and create new interesting product, new interesting programming that you don't see today, that you just go, hey, I just want to try this. Why not? What could go wrong? I lose some time.
What could go wrong? That's excellent. Hey guys, you can keep asking some questions. We could take one or two more, just so I don't monopolize the whole conversation. Because
Well, I'm interested to know how many of you people out there are actually are on the route to having a treatment. How many of you actually have a treatment? And if you have a treatment, what's the genre of the treatment that you have? I'm just kind of interested in that.
Someone has a question actually. If you have any guidelines on treatment length and someone is writing a thriller,
Mm, yes, I love thrillers. So,
music
music,
performance.
documentary,
Wow.
performances. Ooh, nice, very nice. I would say that to answer the question of the length of the treatment, uh, it really depends. The last treatment that I did, it included most of the things that I articulated here. It was more than just a treatment. It was a presentation for consideration of funding, and so they asked for more than just the treatment. The treatment was part of a much larger submission. But a treatment in and of itself, a good, I would say, if you've got 2 pages, you have far too little. And if you have 40 pages, you have far too many. So it can live anywhere between 10 to 20 pages is my guess for just the treatment. It depends on how much you don't want to overwhelm the reader because there is a time limit. But if here's an example, if your treatment only has a log line, which is 2 sentences, a synopsis, which is I don't know 8, 10 sentences, and then a write-up of the first pilot, that's 1 page. And then if you have 12 episodes that you need to summarize over the next number of pages, and that's all that you put in your treatment, then you should expect that you're going to have 2 to 3 per page. So that in that example, we're probably looking at what 6 to 8 pages, and that's just talking about what is in the content, not who you are, why you're doing this, when you hope to roll this out, what is the budget, all that other stuff will be additional pages on top of that.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, Ron. I think we will leave it there today. We are again recording this, so folks, you can get back and check this out, and we will make Ron's slides available as well, and that will be at blackpublicmedia.org. Abimbola, because I like you, I will give you one more question for Rod. She says, what if you're working on an unscripted series in which you're profiling different people, but all of your potential interviewees haven't agreed to do the project? Should you write your idea in your treatment?
Yes, yes. If you don't have the specific person, basically write about the type that of the person that you're hoping to have. So if you want John Legend to be one of the people that you interview, then and you don't know if you can get John Legend because well he is a busy man, then maybe what you want to talk about is someone who is a pop icon and what they represent and why having that type in your project is going to make it a diverse part pool of storytelling. But yes, you should, even if you don't have, I mean, all the time, a lot of producers do this. Our goal is to try to make reality out of smoke and mirrors. So what we'll do is we'll create, documents that have, ideally who the cast members will be in the film, even though they haven't even seen the project yet. But it will give the reader an idea of the type and stature and prestige of a certain actor and the type of actor that we're looking for so that they can get a sense of what we're going for. As we move further along and actually start formally attaching, then we'll swap people out for who it might be with who they really are.
Is it
Because
tacky
as you
to
know,
say things like a John Legend type? Do you mention the name or is that tacky?
you can mention a John Legend type, yeah, anything that's going to help me understand, you know, who you hope to interview or in this unscripted model, who you hope to attract to the project. And again, you don't want to build yourself into such a small hole that the only person who can actually fulfill that role is John
John
Legend.
Legend, right.
It's like, well, it's John Legend type. Well, who is John Legend? He's so unique. Maybe there isn't another type like him. But you can say that you want a young, dynamic pop singer who has a following, and maybe you give 3 or 4 names.
Right.
Like X, Y, Z, A, B, and C, and then it sort of gives you a wider range that says, okay, I have an idea of the quadrant in which the talent that they're looking for is going to live in, as opposed to John Legend. Because in my head, John Legend is a very specific talent and the specific thing that I have. And if you get someone else that is in no way, shape, or form what I envision John Legend to be, then I could feel maybe that there was a little bit of bait and switch, and you don't want that to happen.
Right. Great. Great. Thanks, Ron. Everybody, thanks again for joining us. We will let you go. And then please join us for the rest of our sessions that are going to be monthly. Thank you, Kay. Thank you for joining us. Again, you will find this on our website at blackpublicmedia.org.